pay all of our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And on particularly special nights like this, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land where I was born, where I learned to read and where I gained my great love of books, and that's the Adinji, and that's just south of Cairns. So I'm very honoured. This is a great thing for us to be involved in. I've got very simple duties. So my first housekeeping matter is to ask you to turn your phones to silent, but do feel free to engage in as much social media as you know, as you like, to get everybody knowing about this wonderful collection. The toilets are inside, up the stairs and along the corridor, and we will also finish the night with a signing. So copies of lots of books are for sale at the counter, and we'll do a signing after it as well. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome Sally Wilson, who is the publicist from UQP, the fine publishers of this book. Please welcome Sally Wilson.
Good evening, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight, the Wagan and Turrbal people, and I've just got a few words to read from our publisher, Aviva Tuffield, who couldn't be here tonight. She's based in Melbourne. She says, "Thank you to everyone who is at the launch tonight. I'm sorry I can't be with you. And thank you especially to the panellists there with Mykaela, Ellen Van Neerven and Samuel Wagan Watson. I'd also like to thank Avid Reader for hosting this event. Independent bookstores are the cultural heart of our literary community, and Avid is exemplary in this regard. I want to pay testament to Mykaela Saunders for the very existence of This All Come Back Now. This book is truly her baby, from go to woe. She pitched me the idea of an anthology of blackfellas speculative fiction and asked what the various steps were that she'd need to undertake to make it happen. And then she went out and nailed them, including finding funding for the writers and the cover artist, and I'm sure you'll all agree it's an amazing cover, organising a call out for submissions, reading and responding to the writers, working editorially with those she selected, crafting the shape of the book, writing an excellent and comprehensive introduction, etc., etc. Less than a year ago, Mykaela was still reading submissions and selecting her choices for the book. And here we are now with this incredible groundbreaking book in front of us, which, it should be noted, has already been reprinted in its first month of publication. And it has been receiving stunning reviews too. Congratulations, Mykaela. We at UQP love working with you, and we are so proud of you.
Thank you so much, Sally. Now, before we start the event, I'd like to also welcome our Zoom guests who are zooming in from all around Australia, and acknowledge the traditional owners on all of the areas where people are gathering this evening. Now, on to Mykaela Saunders, who's a Koori and Lebanese writer, teacher, community researcher, and the editor of this very fine collection, This All Came Back Now, the world's first anthology of blackfellas speculative fiction. Mykaela is the 2021 Next Chapter recipient and has won the Elizabeth Jolly Short Story Prize, the National Indigenous Story Award, the Oodgeroo Noonuccal Indigenous Poetry Prize, the Grace Marion Wilson Emerging Writers Prize for Non-Fiction, and the University of Sydney's Sister Alison Bush Graduate Medal for Indigenous Research. Of direct descent and working class and queer, Mykaela belongs to the Tweed-Borough community. Please welcome Mykaela Saunders.
Jingiwala. My name's just ripped up. I haven't seen it for over a year. So welcome to Avid Reader. Thanks, Sally and Aviva. That was so lovely. And thanks, Fiona. So yeah, my name is Mykaela Saunders. I'm a Korean Lebanese writer who belongs to the Tweed-Borough community. I'm the editor of this beautiful book, and I'm really delighted to have you all here on Monday night, and we're packed, it's amazing, for our Meander launch and a discussion about the anthology with Samuel Wagan Watson and Ellen Van Neerven. We're gathered here today on Meander, which has always belonged to the Turrbal and Yagara people, and always will. Bulgulberg to the Brisbane Murray community, especially to the elders, those who are still here and those who aren't, but whose work lives on through their legacies. And one of those elders has an excerpt in this book. I have utmost respect for all the work they've done for country, community and culture, despite the ongoing undermining of their sovereignty, which has never been ceded, never will be. Jingeri to all the other blackfellas here, Bulgulwan, I'm grateful to be here. Now about this session and the guests. This All Come Back Now is the first ever anthology of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander speculative fiction, a book written, curated, edited and designed by blackfellas about blackfellas for blackfellas. This All Come Back Now expands and subverts the expectations of speculative fiction to centre First Nations communities, cultures and creativity, and features many genres of spec fic, such as ghost stories, bush horror stories, urban fantasy, science fiction, and many more imaginative and unsettling genres. I'm proud to be the editor of this beautiful book, and I conceived of it as a love letter to kin and country, to memory and to future thinking. Joining me are two award-winning poets and writers that I have admired for a long time, who are two of 21 contributors to This All Come Back Now, to discuss their stories in the anthology and their thoughts on the spec fic genre. Samuel Wagan Watson lives and writes in his hometown of Brisbane. Descended from Mununjali and Germanic heritage, he's authored over a dozen collections of poetry, primarily inspired by the oral traditions of spiritual lore passed down from his elders. Notable accolades include the 1999 David Unaipon Award, the Kenneth Slessor Poetry Prize, the 2005 New South Wales Premier's Book of the Year, and the 2018 Patrick White Award. Ellen Van Neerven is the award-winning author of Heat and Light, Comfort Food and Throat, all from University of Queensland Press. Throat has received many awards, including Book of the Year in 2021, New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards. Ellen also belongs to the Mununjali people with the scenic ring. They are the editor of the 2021 anthology Flock, First Nation Stories Then and Now from UP, and they are also the co-editor of Unlimited Futures, Speculative, Visionary, Black and Black Fiction, out this year with Fremantle Press. Now, I just want to start by talking about your story. So Samuel's story Closing Time is an urban ghost story. It's an atmospheric exploration of the father-son relationship and the ways that the past seeps into the present. Set 2 years ago, in autumn 2020, it channels and exudes the global ambient anxiety from the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Watson's distinctive lyricism is, as always, very rich and evocative. Samuel, could you please take us into the world of Closing Time? You know, the world, the characters, what themes and ideas you were thinking about?
Thank you. So, and once again, congratulations on putting this out, because I see how to go at the Elizabeth Jolie this year and never made the deadline.
Yeah,
So
congrats.
I didn't make the deadline, I failed.
I failed at
So
the day.
winning the Elizabeth Jolie, I think I just hibernate for a year or so, but Mykaela sisters stayed in the saddle and kept working, which is so admirable. And then for her to contact me and with this story for the anthology, I mean, there's really good and scary writing, but to the point that it's just really clean and tight. the senses, some of these are also put together are just really poetic and beautiful. I just have real trouble comparing my story to some of their works. I mean, I should acknowledge Professor Janine Lane, who wrote this thesis size review of our work, and maybe pick up the anthology again, have a serious look at it. And so yeah, so thank you, Janine, for that, because it's just such a forensic and outstanding piece of work. So yeah, my story kind of explores I follow his so in his 40s, and it's when COVID was like fully blown. You know, we all don't live through that again, but especially the isolation, the paranoia. But my character lives with the ghost of his father. He won't shut up. He won't talk. And yeah, there are people in our community, in our midst, to live with the echoes of their old people. And that's what I want to capture in this story. He didn't have the respect that, like, he wanted to definitely tell his father this, shut up. We're gonna let him be. You know, but he didn't have the heart to do it. Yeah. So thank you for
Mykaela, sorry, could you just give the microphone, the other microphone to Helen? There's another microphone behind you. There's another. Yeah, it's speaking to each other.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to ask you more questions about your story, but I'm going to pick up on what you said about those echoes. So Ellen's story, Water, is actually an abridged version of their novella of the same name, which originally appeared in their debut collection, Heat and Light, which also won the David E. Napier Award in 2013 and was published by UPP in 2014. The story is set in a near future Canepa or Russell Island. In this world, the government is about to create a separate Australia too, where Aboriginal people will soon be segregated at the expense of the island's ancestral inhabitants. Water focuses on the relationship between a human, Caden, and a plant person, Larapinta, showing how their fascination with each other grows as its own story within the broader saga. Ellen, can you tell us about this very weird and wonderful story you wrote, like the premise of the story, some of the things you were inspired by when you wrote it?
Yeah, thanks, Mykaela, and I also want to congratulate you on this anthology. It's a really massive achievement, and it's still, like, I guess some of the stories are older, but as a book itself, it's like still like a baby, like it's only a couple of weeks old. So yeah, massive congratulations to you. It's really great to have, be able to launch it tonight. That story that you chose, Border, I wrote about 10 years ago. So in some ways it's sort of like hard to kind of go and trace back these like footsteps and think about like what I was thinking about at the time. But it's a story that's really inspired by water, obviously, and about the Moreton Bay area and the mangrove as like this really important kind of it's a really important kind of life force, and it's really kind of important, I guess, symbol in the work, in how it speaks to resistance. And I think it's a pretty, like as you mentioned, it's a pretty out there story in some of the things that I imagine in that work, but it's definitely rooted in like history, as well as thinking about using futurism to kind of think about the kind of past, present, future is kind of being very close. And so it's a story that it's like I said, it's been really good to reflect on that story 10 years later and think about how it kind of sits now, because I was writing it imagining 2032, I think, and now 2032 is just around the corner. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, you wrote it when you were a baby, really, 10 years ago. And I think it's just, I remember when I read it a few years ago, and it just blew me away. And then I looked you up, and when I realized that you were so young when you wrote this like incredible story, I was so blown away. And here we are now. Love this. Well, now that you've told us a little bit about your stories, let's hear you breathe some life into them. Samuel, would you read a bit of closing time for us?
So I put
Do you want me to help?
Sam Watson.
Do you want to start from the beginning? Begin? You're right.
If I sit here, I promise I won't drink your wine.
Shadows dance collaboration with shimmers, breaking light from the hallway, entering the dim. An open window, the black soul door. Somebody's let in, somebody's let out. Jackson picked up the letter. University of River City. Closed the door. Jackson didn't even see her opening the letter. His father better remember from out of the bleakness. What's that then? It's nothing. Your mother left on a day like today. Linda's face weighed heavily across the pool in Jackson's head. He removed the pressure he applied on the intercom button, festering anxiety, needing to hear her sweet voice. The pebbles he sought strewn ripple upon ripple. She either didn't see him or wouldn't see him. He drove his feet over to a chair by the window and placed the letter by the ashtray. When Jackson took out his last cigarette, he didn't even pause before lighting it. Flare of flame. Nicotine You came toxins burst to his lungs as he sparked up. For a moment, he recalled the hopeless way in which his face had pushed from that madness. Was the bacteria in the killed tin box? How many sad, sorry people had used the intercom before him? He placed the cigarette on the edge of the ashtray where it sat on nickel butts and dumpers. The he experienced was perhaps the lapse of mental breakdown. He was lucky that his episode, the police had been called. He was lucky that now it was time to focus, remain sane and alert, to not let hysteria overriding again, relax and regain. Dad, in your travels, you've never seen Mum. He asked, the stillness of the wall.
Pretty good, yeah.
His father responded with mumbles, ruffles. Ruffles, the dead calm whenever Jackson's memory of the voice or lecture from his past. One of his professors speaking about the law and precedents of fact and doubt. It's not what you know, but what you can prove. The evidence here for his father. Boys that required filling, and your reflections, forgotten echoes, harboring reactions, reactions of the past. Jackson looked into the window of the evening. A snake plume of cigarettes smoke escaping out the window and into the breeze. Jackson seeing his milestone wax and wane. So you've never seen Mum on the other side, interrupted Jackson. Jackson senior paused. I know she's out there. I know she's out there. And for a slow moment, Jackson witnessed he had to see with his father carrying off the end of a wasted cigarette. In the remainder of the day, one of the ghosts chasing ghosts. Darkness and uncertainty engulfing everything. A time when proof of life and love has strained meaning. A modern society with time for poltergeist in a pandemic. Jackson's slide of the letter to the University of Recife. Pulled the window down and shut on the incoming night. He had no more room for ghosts. It was closing time.
Thank you so much. I was saying to Samuel before, I've read all of these stories probably about a dozen times each, and it's just so lovely to hear the readers bring them to life. You know, it's just special. Samuel, your story has a particularly explicit and interesting relationship to time. Can you tell us about this? How time is working in the story?
Well, with being a judge on the recent New South Wales Literature Awards, the books I had to read, the time factors, I think Indigenous writing, and thank you to University of Queensland Press for working so hard to get our idea, because we are forcing reckoned with, I think.
Yeah.
There's an important factor in the way the time is set, like you can think of a Tony Birch story and you don't know it's 1978 because he talks about a song and denim jeans and thing and Toronto and think, oh yeah, well that's definitely not today. So my story, when I live alone, I drive everyone nuts who comes around. The time factor in my story delves around the time of the pandemic when, it was a really still time. But I enjoyed that time because I knew no one was really going to knock on my door. Disturb me from writing. And it's time that you got to jump on.
Well, yeah, so when I asked Sam if he might have had a story for the anthology, he sent me 8. So I could only choose one, but might be a ghost story collection coming out one day. I hope so. They were all really good, but I wanted to choose this one because I just thought there's so many instances of mirroring and twinning and ghosts and things that happen again. And when you read it the first time, you see it as this ghost story, but when you read it the 12th time, like I have, you see all these other really clever connections. And I'm really in awe of the way you write. And I'm so happy that the story's in there. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think what everybody shares with ancestral is, what we're doing now, it's a very important small one that keeps alive.
Yeah, keep sharing the stories.
And we must be all pain in the butt. Blackfellas coming, we have boys, we'll look at our own books. Hey, they clean our books up. But yeah, it's a good time.
It is a good time.
Black Rod.
It is. I'm a blow-in and very it's an honour to be part of this, but yeah, it is a good time. Thanks to the people who paved the way. Ellen, would you read from Water for us? Do you want to?
I was just thinking about, do you remember our first festival together and we were in Toronto?
Yeah, Toronto. It's unreal. I suddenly realised this was the hotel that the Rolling Stones absconded with Justin Trudeau's mother. We're staying in this hotel.
Yeah, I think you just asked me to read from the beginning.
Where have you gone?
Yeah, and look, this is an extract from a larger work, which is in Mark. That's okay. When the position for a cultural liaison officer came up, I thought, great. I love the chance to work with other Aboriginal people because that's another way of finding out about my culture and what I missed out on growing up. Well, the real reason my cousin Julie laughed at me when I got back to her after the interview was because I wasn't actually going to be working with Aboriginal people in my cultural liaison officer role. Yep. I'll be working with what they call the sand plants. There's a lot of talk about them in the media lately. All sensationalist crap, I reckon, like asylum seekers and the naughties. I don't really know much about them, to be honest. I don't want to call them sand plants. Sand people or plant people seems more sensitive, but I don't know which yet to use. These creatures, beings, I'm not yet comfortable on how to place them, were formed when they started experimenting here, mining the sea in preparation for the islandizing. It was a young botanist who first discovered them. He distinguished their green human-like heads lined up on the banks of Russell Island. A lot doesn't make sense to me yet. I have a feeling the documents don't say everything. Right from the start, the government have been very protective of them. You need permission from a government official to go near the population. Basically, they present a problem for the project at this stage, as all the southern Moreton Bay Islands are being evacuated. This means everyone has to leave their homes and businesses for an indeterminate amount of time while the engineers work on the reforming. These plant people who divide their time between the water, Russell Island, and the edges of some of the smaller unoccupied islands must cooperate during the process for the safety of all. Some of them rude. That is, they firm their roots to an area into the ground and are hard to persuade to move. You can't get them away.
Interestingly enough, and it probably should have been obvious, but both of your stories are set here, like in some parts of your stories anyway. But when we meet Caden, the protagonist, she's disconnected from culture. Even though she lives in a future Brisbane, where on the surface it seems like Aboriginal culture is celebrated everywhere, Aboriginal place names are being reinstated, Aboriginal art is a hot commodity consumed by white Australia, and Aboriginal artists are so in demand they frequently burn out. Caden even takes a job that she thinks will connect her to her people. She really only comes into her true power when she connects with the urban Black community and joins them in their fight for country. This tells us something about what culture really is and where it truly resides. Is that, am I reading?
Yeah, I was sorry, just like when you were talking, I was just thinking about how when I wrote the story 10 years ago, a lot of the things that I wrote in that story, I'm not saying I'm a prophet or anything, but it's sort of like come like true, like in terms of like the more the visibility. Like I think in my story, I had like stuff like Aboriginal art on buses and trains and stuff like that, which 10 years ago, you know, didn't happen. This is just recent, last couple of years, and more of a more of a push to like reinstate place names and stuff like that in the, last little bit. In my story, they get, they kind of miss the mark on the government, they miss the mark on everything. And I won't comment about that. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said of, in terms of like symbolic gestures about like whether they actually, sometimes they do potentially kind of do harm sometimes. Anyway, I forgot what your question was.
Oh, I just wanted, I mean, I'm always spitting out how young you were when you wrote, how young you were when you wrote this, and just this, like, as you said, like, maybe you're not a prophet, maybe you are, but this, all this culture is just saturated and it's so hyper visible, but that's not, I mean, it's a surface level culture, but what the real culture is where people come together and they share stories and they fight. And I don't know, I was wondering what were the kind of hopes and fears for community and country that you were working through with this story? Because there's a lot in there.
I think in the story, there's another taking people away from their homes, like it's happening again real time in the story. And that's where the young character in the story really there's something clicks in her where she's like, this is not right, and I've really this is kind of when it's kind of a directly affecting her, and so she has really just feels like she has no choice but to fight back. And she works within the government in the story. She works within the government sort of system, so it's about whether you kind of attack it from the inside or whether she kind of goes off and joins other mob fighting from the outside. And it's sort of I guess it's in terms of structure, if you think about a story structure, it's like I always think about a short story about like there's always a moment in the story where the character makes a decision that's going to like impact the whole little world that's within that story. And so I think everything else kind of leads up to that moment, or this, because she's a bit of a wallflower as well, and she's really doesn't really have much to back her up on initially at the start of the story. She's really young, but she's absorbing and taking everything in, using all of that stuff to kind of compute and tuck away and be like, okay, well, this is, I have enough information now that I have no choice but to kind of use this. And
it's really inspiration, because it shows that like the only way that the environmental destruction will be stopped, and actually the only way that environmental destruction is ever stopped and can ever be stopped in real life is through community cohesion. It's the only way. So I love it. Okay, now we've spoken about your text, let's talk a little bit about the context of your stories within genre. In my intro to the anthology, I talk about the differences between Indigenous and Western notions of realism and speculative. Basically, spec fic can mean many things to many people. Samuel, you're mostly known for your poetry and more realist fiction, but when you sent me a story, you told me you've been writing a lot of ghost stories lately, and you sent me 8 to consider. And they're all very good and clever. What's up with the sudden proliferation of ghost stories for you?
The what?
Sudden, like, explosion of writing lots of ghost stories.
Sudden. Just for, I suppose, me mind every day that I live in a world where there's things like respect and knowledge that the serial orders is because it's all the time. Sometimes the cool thing with sometimes you suddenly realise you're the kickiest kid in the class. And then you get invited back to your high school because you're the most talented student that's graduated from high school. And I actually said to the principal, "What, everyone else go to jail?" Deal. No, I mean, I think with Alan more, because she's very quiet and reserved, but there's really wicked introspection that's just waiting to be launched, and it's that force, I suppose. I mean, I love just getting up in the morning and writing. So what was the question?
Well, the main, oh no, I'm very long-winded. You know, you're mainly, you know, you've written so much poetry and you've written a few short stories that are more maybe realistic. And then all of a sudden, you just started to write all these ghost stories. What's up with that?
Well, I was setting up 30 years ago, I was setting up short stories in the magazine to write back and say, "Don't send us anything more." Your story writing is just terrible. But the good thing was there was guest editor, Dr. Pete Minto, who's a great poet.
He's my super.
Okay.
I love him.
Well,
Yeah.
Pete, actually, it was a time when you had to, you know, you'd leave your ear out for the buzz of the posters boy. You wrote that letter and the rejection slips, and some of these rejection slips really nice. And that quite Pete needs to send me a rejection slip that said, "It's all about poetry." Because even though his story is really terrible, there's some lines in this that are really poetic, and put it all together, and within 6 weeks, we published about 4 journals.
Wow.
So I wasn't that hard. And then it was really good stepping stone to learn poetry from a voice, then come back to short story writing. And I don't know whether I'll ever get into a novel. Maybe I'll just leave it, and the novel will find itself like the short stories find themselves.
That's incredible.
Hey, it's really fun to design these concepts and then develop relationships with, I mean, the editors and people working behind the scenes, for these big literary jobs like the Risk Review and Heat, Westerly, the Chicago Quarterly Review. They're not portraying Indigenous people as just wonderful, like blackfellas stands up on Lake Cock up on there. Mourn and Nala were just as good as the Stephen Kings.
Yeah.
All my McCarthy's.
Yeah, I can see influences both those writers and also actually it's yeah, well, so yeah, well, Ellen, like Samuel, you're mostly known for your poetry and more realist or naturalist fiction. But I know that you're a lover of spec fic, having edited your own spec anthology this year. And in fact, you wrote this story 10 years ago, and I know you've written another spec fic story, which was in Flock. Can you tell us about your relationship to spec fic over the years, even from when you were little?
Yeah, it's always really when it's good, it's really good, you know. So yeah, I was reading like Margaret Atwood. I don't know. Because we had a yarn a few weeks ago, and I was mentioning writers then, and now they're just out of my head. Yeah, it's sort of our stuff that's the most exciting stuff. I think this anthology is going to really influence like a new mob of writers, you know, in a really exciting way, which is great. And I guess I'll flip that back on you. And do you feel like there's the spaces there for this type of blackfella, speculative, ghost stories, science fiction, all that sort of writing that's obviously like really strong in us, and like there's so many of us that are writing in those genres. Do you think those spaces are available?
Yes, absolutely. I think just as Samuel was saying, these stories were getting rejected years ago, and I actually heard a lot of Aboriginal people say that their stories were rejected from some of the more mainstream Australian spec fic public. Same here, but a lot of the more mainstream literary or independent publishers in Australia have been publishing spec fic for a while. In fact, Samuel's father, the amazing activist and author, Uncle Sam Watson, who he wrote the first Aboriginal spec fic novel in 1990. So, our people have been writing these weird, amazing stories for a while, and actually goes way back, because all of our traditional stories deal with things that, we think of as spec fic, like time warps and magic and demons and all of that stuff. But I guess we think of spec fic as a Western genre, but it actually borrowed these literary devices from, other cultures.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely, I think Aboriginal people, we've all like everyone loves ghost stories and horror. Like we all have just loved that. And but in terms of being published, the first one in 1990, but then, and it was slow, but the last few years there's been this explosion of spec fic.
And that's across all genres as well, like in terms of film, TV, and
yes,
art, and video games and everything. Yeah.
And I mean, I would attribute that to just there being an explosion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander writing in general. But also, I think, I don't know, for me, we come from people who there was an attempt at genocide on us. And so for us, it's really important to imagine our futures and what our young people will be growing up, what the world, I think it's important for everyone, but for us to have survived, our people survive that, I think it's incredibly important. And there's an explosion, and I really do hope this inspires new writers to write more. I was certainly inspired to write my own spec fic by reading, your story, and like Alexis writes The Swan Walk, and other incredible fiction. So let's hope, hey, maybe we can do a.
That's incredible. The
best.
Tartarian Swan Walk.
Yeah.
So
I was inspired by some North American anthologies to start studying writing spec fic. And you've got an anthology out this year, which is similar, same but different. I remember we were talking and I didn't want to cut your grass, so I kind of opened up into not just like futuristic stuff, but ghost stories and stuff. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just briefly talk about the book which came out in February this year. It's called Unlimited Futures and it has a purple and red cover. It's done by the artist Jenna Lee. And I guess, you know, it's this very specific work in that it's sort of like a collaboration or like a solidarity project between First Nations mob from Australia, blackfellas from Australia, and African Australian writers, Afro-Black writers from the African diaspora that are living in Australia. And of course, that's a very diverse groups of people, and we're all also really diverse. So it's a really and we also opened up to speculative poetry as well, and short stories, and they're all new works. They're all never been published before, and some really new authors in there as well, but also writers like Alison Whittaker writing her first ever short story in our book. As someone who's known for poetry, I'm like, geez, so when I read it, but when she emailed it, and it's like, I think always the good writers always write emails where they're like, oh, I'm not sure if this is any good, and you know that when you open it, it's going to be really amazing. Because I think maybe some sort of self-doubt is like actually really important in the act of writing. But anyway, it's like a really great story. There's like really good, really good stories across the board. Lisa Fuller has a story in there. A lot of our writers overlap, as we've talked about previously. And my co-editor, Ray Ismail, is Sudanese, living in Bolu or Perth. And yeah, they were able to source a rich kind of group of like really exciting African writers as well. And we did it as a solidarity project to kind of say, we're not the same, but we live here, we live on this continent, and our stories are really, really incredible stories. And doing it with Ray, like we didn't step on each other's toes. We had a really good relationship when we were like working with those writers, and we had a lot of really great conversations around it. And yeah, because it's been out for a few months, it's been, it's had a couple of events and stuff like that, and it's really great to also see some of the emerging writers have their like first events, as you probably are experiencing with this book, having done Sydney Writers Festival and other. Just really, I think, Uncle Tony Birch said at the Brisbane Writers Festival on his opening speech, he was like, I have a tip for you, go and see the writers that are doing their first event, not like the ones that are doing their thousandth event. And it's a fair point. I mean, we're always, going to show up to, people that are consistently good, but it's like, it's a good point to kind of, it's really great to sort of see so many new writers, as well as a mix, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I was wondering, there's not a whole lot of time left, but I was wondering if anybody had a question for anybody.
Any questions?
Maybe on Zoom, someone might have a question.
Inspired the title?
What inspired the title?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Can I read a link from my introduction because I talk about it? Okay. This All Come Back Now is a line taken from the opening story, Mourn, a Transgression by Evelyn Araluen. Throughout this story of departures and returns, the spectral narrator speaks of herself coming back like falling star, or like scintillation, or like nothing. All manner of other things come back too. Waves will be coming back for their rivers, and dead creatures come back bringing comfort. At the end of the story, as the narrator crosses a threshold she's resisted since the beginning, she announces, "This all come back now," alluding to the singularity of thought and feeling that she's now become, at one with everything, right at the end of consciousness. In this anthology, this all come back for us too. All those things that have been taken from us that we collectively mourn the loss of or attempt to recover and revive, as well as all the things that we thought we'd gotten rid of that are always returning to haunt and hound us. Characters return, sometimes in different forms, and things are returned to characters. There are themes that come back through this book time and time again. Family and other kin, old people, ancestors, government interference, corporate greed, the destruction of land and water, the archive, technology, language, law, ghosts, hauntings, warm and deep belonging, and despairing alienation. This all come back now speaks to what Grace L. Dillon calls viscabiang, returning to ourselves, in her anthology Walking the Clouds, which inspired this one. It also speaks to our cultural conception of time as everywhere or all times at once. So when I was trying to choose the title, I was going through the stories and I was picking phrases that jumped out at me, and no surprise, all of these phrases were from stories by poets. And this one just kept, when I was thinking about, it's really hard in the anthology trying to find something that unifies it, and that was just something that spoke to everything that we were talking about. And I know it's hard to remember. I know it's a bit, there was a bit of talk about maybe we should change it, but I couldn't imagine it. I couldn't imagine just picking something else, because to me it made sense. Yeah.
That's great. Any more questions? Just a final question on that. Could you just tell us who the artist is, Mykaela?
Yes.
And this.
The artist is Jessica Johnson at Nungala Creative, who also just did a really incredible collection at Indigenous Australian fashion, like branching out into clothes. And a few years ago, I saw their work on a poster for Wagan in Sydney.
Oh,
And I
I remember that presentation.
yeah, and it just blew me away. And
Is that the Space Invaders one?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah. And when I saw that, I just thought that's everything I love in picture. And when I got the funding for this, I had a really small budget. But I wrote to her and we had a yarn. She rang me. I told her about the project, and she was so busy. She didn't have time, and it was way below her budget, but she just loved it. And she was like, "Okay, I'll do it." And she sent me this, and she's like, "Oh, I don't know, is it okay?" I'm just kidding me. It's so beautiful. Yeah, so yeah, I feel really lucky that I was able to have that creative control to kind of, and UQP trusted me with that and said, you can choose, and I think I did the right thing. Yeah.
Yep, great. Oh, thank you. That's a perfect way to end what has been a wonderful, wonderful night. Can I ask you all to join me in thanking Mykaela Saunders, Alan Van Neerven, and Samuel Wagan Watson. Thank you all for coming. I'm so pleased that you could join me in this very special night. So it was a great honour.